Order. We now come to the urgent question. James Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your permission to ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement on the Government's decision to close the HMRC Self-Assessment helpline every year between April and September.
Got good news, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Ealing North and others for raising the important issue of HMRC's customer services and its plans to provide better services for taxpayers. HMRC, as honourable members are probably aware, has announced it is halting planned changes to its helplines that aim to encourage more taxpayers to self-serve online. HMRC has listened to the feedback and recognises more needs to be done to ensure all taxpayers' needs are met, while also encouraging those who can transition to online services. Making best use of online services allows HMRC to help more taxpayers and get the most out of every pound of taxpayers' money by boosting productivity. HMRC Helpline and web chat advisors will always be there for those taxpayers who need support because they are vulnerable, digitally excluded, or have complex affairs. And I recognise that such reassurances were not sufficiently clearly communicated yesterday. And the pace of this change, of course, needs to match the public appetite for managing their tax affairs online. The changes to the self-assessment, VAT and PAYE helplines announced by HMRC will therefore all be halted while HMRC engages with stakeholders. This means the phone lines will remain open as usual. HMRC will now work with stakeholders, including myself, while continuing to encourage customers to self-serve and access the information they need more quickly and easily by going online or to the HMRC app, which of course is available 24/7.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his response, but the question I am tempted to ask is who on earth is running the Treasury? This morning, just after we requested this urgent question, we found out the Chancellor has told HMRC to pause this change. This is a U-turn of quite extraordinary speed and indignity after HMRC announced yesterday it would permanently close its self-assessment helpline altogether for half the year from April till September. This morning, a Treasury source said that ministers have halted this change immediately, implying that ministers were taken by surprise by HMRC's announcement yesterday. So can the Minister confirm whether any Treasury ministers had any involvement in the decision announced yesterday, or was the announcement yesterday made by HMRC without any ministerial involvement? In announcing the closure of the helpline yesterday, HMRC said the changes would, and I quote, allow our helpline advisors to focus support where it is most needed, helping those with complex tax queries and those who are vulnerable and need extra support. So can the Minister confirm that HMRC's plans to help those who are vulnerable and need extra support are now in tatters after the Chancellor's chaotic U-turn? Mr. Speaker, I note that reports of the Chancellor's position refers to a pause of the change rather than a scrapping of it altogether. So can the Minister confirm that the self-assessment helpline will now remain fully open this year? And if this plan is merely paused, can the Minister confirm whether HMRC will still be looking at months-long periods of closure for self-assessment helpline in the future? Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the announced closure of the helpline yesterday came not as part of a comprehensive, orderly or effective plan to help customers move online, but rather as a panicked response to HMRC's service levels collapsing to an all-time low. And Mr. Speaker, it is clear from the chaotic U-turn today that this government is fundamentally unstable and has given up on serious governing.
Yes, I'm sure the Honourable Member is aware that HMRC is a non-ministerial department. Ministers set strategy and work closely with the Department of Operations and Communications. It's also important, I think, to recognise that 67,000 people work for HMRC, and they go to work every day trying to do the right thing, and I think it's important we recognise that many people work very hard. In terms of the overall strategy, it is absolutely right and one I completely support, and I'll give the Honourable Member an example of the reason why we need to encourage and support the move to online. In 22-23, HMRC received more than 3 million calls on just 3 things that can easily be done digitally: resetting online passwords, getting your tax code, and getting your national insurance number. That's almost 500 people working full-time to answer just those calls. And of course, those resources could be redeployed. The Honourable Gentleman as well can absolutely get the reassurance that those who are not digitally savvy and those with difficulties will always and have always been able to access services, including telephone services.
Chair of the Select Committee, Harriett, Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Financial Secretary and the Chancellor for listening to the howl of pain that came from ordinary taxpayers when they saw that announcement yesterday. The people who contact the HMRC hotline are the most law-abiding, tax-paying people across this land. And the Treasury Committee this morning has published more data that shows that it is increasingly difficult to contact HMRC by telephone. Now, while I fully endorse what the Minister has just said about the long-term strategy to move people online, it can't be done in a way where it is randomly shut down that you can contact HMRC by telephone. The Minister has an excellent digital track record in the private sector before he came into Parliament. Can I urge him to use that experience to make this much more of a gradual transition for those law-abiding citizens of ours?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for her work and, of course, the Select Committee on this area. And I know that HMRC customer service has been an area of focus for her and others for some time, and I appreciate the input. I recognise and appreciate as well that she acknowledges the potential opportunities and upside to encouraging more people to go online. But the point she's making is really important, and HMRC have taken the feedback with good grace, because it's important that we move at the speed at which the public are willing to move. And of course, some are not willing or able to go to a pure online services. And sorry, I didn't respond to the Honourable Gentleman's comment earlier on in terms of the telephone lines staying open. Yes, of course they will.
SNP spokesperson Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is absolute chaos. The proposal to permanently close the self-assessment helpline for half the year was truly half-baked and irresponsible, as was the planned restrictions to the VAT helpline. Now, the reverse is welcome, but the fact that this announcement was made at all highlights the disconnect at the heart of HMRC's customer operation. As the Federation for Small Businesses pointed out, customer service levels are at an all-time low, a view backed up by the Public Accounts Committee in this place. At a time when the Chancellor's policies are dragging more people into PAYE through fiscal drag, it was typically tone-deaf to people's needs. Fran Heathcote from the PCS union said, "A combination of low pay and micromanagement is rife across the whole of HMRC's customer service department." Now, the Minister said this is a non-ministerial department, but we know that it's been told what to do by the Chancellor overnight. So when did the government get notice of this announcement? Was this announcement a reaction to the Chancellor's decision to cut HMRC's budget by £1.6 billion next year? Will he now ensure that that cut is reversed and order HMRC to recruit more customer service staff? And will he now instruct HMRC to make this reversal permanent?
Yes, as I outlined a few moments ago, I think we can all appreciate in this House that in order to serve customers, in particular those who most need support, we need to make sure that those who don't need to go online have alternative channels, which actually, by the way, the customer service levels are higher in online channels, and the use of the app, which I encourage all individuals to use as well. So those who can go online and will find a very effective and efficient service, that is absolutely the right strategy and one that I completely and utterly support. We've also had a trial in the past of the closure of the lines, and the report, actually, some more information came out yesterday, showed that that worked quite well. And then in terms of other measures which the Honourable Gentleman raises, in terms of redeployment, HMRC is proactive in notifying, for example, people who do not need to provide a self-assessment form. I think above 1 million people last year were notified they don't need to do so. And of course, other changes in government policy, such as recognising those who are on high incomes but who don't have complex tax affairs, up to £150,000, for example. Again, we have communicated that they don't need to provide self-assessment return as well. So there is a broad package going on here to enhance and improve customer service. But we recognise many people like and would prefer telephone service.
Sir.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Despite extensive government investment in rural broadband in my constituency of Derbyshire Dales, there remains a lack of connectivity. So small businesses and also the elderly and the vulnerable are still having difficulty going fully online. What can he do to ensure that nobody will be left behind in Derbyshire Dales?
Yes, again, I thank the Honourable Lady for those comments, because she's making a really important point that there are still people in this country who are not digitally aware or who are digitally excluded for a variety of reasons, including obviously in her constituency. And this is why it's an important part of the strategy that we always ensure that those who are digitally excluded, those who are vulnerable or have particularly complex affairs, can always reach a human being. And that, of course, is the strategy.
Manji Singh Desi.
Thank you very much. Mr Speaker, another chaotic government U-turn when the Chancellor this morning took the decision to scrap plans to close HMRC phone lines less than 24 hours after the measures were announced. A Treasury source this morning has admitted that closing HMRC's helplines would, and I quote, be to the detriment of the general public and the vulnerable who need access to the helplines to support them with tax matters. Mr Speaker, this is part of a wider malaise within Tory broken Britain, where many of my Slough constituents cannot get to speak to a doctor when they want to, cannot register for an NHS dentist, and much worse besides. So, Minister, why was this decision taken in the first place?
Mr Speaker, I mentioned in my opening comments, and I think it's important to stress again here, that it was never intended, and I think we do need to make sure that nobody scaremongers here, it was never intended and never would have been the case, that the vulnerable, the digitally excluded, or those with complex affairs would not be able to access these services, even with the proposals yesterday. So I'm afraid on that particular point, the Honourable Gentleman is just wrong.
James Sunday.
Mr Speaker, thank you. I'm grateful to the Minister for his statement this morning, which I welcome. Back in September last year, in this very place, I raised the issue of heavy fines being imposed upon self-employed constituents for late submission of self-assessment forms, even though no monies were owed. I did meet the Minister at the time, but could I please ask the current Minister to write to me and to give me an update on progress?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for raising this matter. And again, just to reiterate, there is a very good reason why HMRC's structure and relationship with government is as it is in a non-ministerial role, because it would be inappropriate for ministers to interfere with individual tax affairs. However, I would be more than happy to raise the particular point that the honourable gentleman has raised and respectfully ask HMRC to pay due attention to it. And of course, government sets broader policy.
Helen Morgan.
Speaker, as a former financial controller of a small business in a rural place, I've used those helplines extensively, not least in sorting out disputes where HMRC have got their data wrong. Given the fact that our own experience is that the website process is Byzantine, the waits on the phone line are inordinately long, and we know that £36 billion of tax goes uncollected by HMRC every year, how can anybody have any confidence that the Treasury is working effectively?
Very simply, I'll say to the Honourable Lady, we actually have one of the lowest tax gaps reported in the world at about 4.8%, precisely because of the clarity of the tax system and the efficiency of HMRC in terms of gaining the tax that's owed. Of course, there are customer service challenges, and I'm having conversations with HMRC about that, and they're also held to account in the Chamber and elsewhere, Select Committee and so on, as appropriate. But I do think it's important that we do recognise the volume of correspondence, for example, with HMRC, 38 million telephone calls in 22-23, 16 million pieces of correspondence, and therefore it makes sense, if we were looking at this as a private sector business, we could see how it would make sense to strategically move as much of that activity, where appropriate, online, where it can be more appropriately and often more quickly dealt with.
Line notes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My Select Committee is currently carrying out an inquiry into the rights of older people and met this week in Andover with Independent Age and a range of stakeholders who were making the point to me that they need to be able to access all services on the telephone, that they find it difficult if they have disabilities, if they are visually impaired. Indeed, those who are hard of hearing need websites with an overlay of British Sign Language in order to be able to communicate effectively. They were horrified yesterday at the announcement about the closure of the helplines, and I just wanted to ascertain what consultation there was with the Member of Parliament for Mid Sussex in her new expanded role as Minister for Disabled People. Was there any consultation with her as to what impact these changes might have? And further, as Members of Parliament, when we're dealing with our constituency casework with HMRC, they now try and push us to dealing with it on the telephone and not by email. Will my honourable friend reassure me that these changes will make sure that vulnerable people can still use telephone services? And would he just make a comment on that little contradiction that we have between the way that we're dealt with and the way the public are?
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her comments, and I can assure her on the point of HMRC's communication with colleagues on behalf of our constituents. We're having live conversations. Some members do tell me that they would prefer a telephone call, others would prefer email. It's important that we have both. Those are live conversations I'm having with HMRC, and I'm more than happy to communicate views and opinions from across the chamber on that point. The other point she raised, and I do want to make sure that this is reiterated, because I say in yesterday's announcements I am well aware that one of the biggest areas of concern, and one of the reasons why the feedback was so loud, is a concern that those who were vulnerable would not be helped, including those with disabilities. It was never the intention or the plan that those people would not be able to access online or indeed web chat or other channels.
On the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, the Minister has said he's spoken about the public who are willing or able to access the services online. We in this House have to do our own self-assessment form, and I'm willing and able, but I still need access to a telephone line. And the Minister says that there are 500 people with the same 3 questions. Well, those 3 questions obviously can't be handled by the online system. So is the Minister confident that they have the digital tools to cater for more than 12 million self-assessment taxpayers following this announcement?
Yes, actually, I do need to correct the Honourable Lady. Actually, the vast majority of those points that I raised could be handled online, including, for example, use of the app. And I say one of the things we must do is communicate far more clearly, and it's a fair point being raised in the Chamber today, and one that I will continue to discuss with HMRC, because there are clearly some challenges with communication, what's available, where help exists, and so on. But in terms of the digital offerings, in particular the app, there is a wealth of information on that, and I do encourage people to adopt those where possible. But she's also making a valid point that where they can't, they need other help, and that is what we're listening to.
Julian Lewis.
HMRC made a serious mistake, and the government acted commendably quickly in intervening to put matters right. I'm sure the government will now take a close interest on what happens next. So, as a matter of policy, will he ensure that whatever the future holds, it won't be anything as sudden or as brutal as this, and that there will be a trial period before anything as dramatic is implemented across the board?
Yes, I thank the Honourable Member for his comments as well. I should be clear, as I mentioned a few moments ago, there has been a trial of closure of telephone services in the past, and the results of that, again, have just been recently reported and showed that that trial worked quite well. The challenge, and we've heard it overnight, and it's an important one, and we're hearing it again in the Chamber, is that the confidence behind that has not been effectively communicated, and the reassurances that I, for example, personally had in terms of what would happen if services were closed down to help those who are not able to access online services, the disabled, those who are not able to get digital access in the particular complex cases. The reassurance was not there that they would be looked after, and I think that is an important point in terms of making sure that as we move forward, as HMRC move forward, and as we develop policy, that we move at a pace that people are comfortable with.
Speaker, I hope that this screaming U-turn by HMRC is a result of action by the Minister, and if it is, then I congratulate him on stepping in so quickly. But does he not agree with me that it is totally unwarranted, at a time when more and more people are being dragged into complex tax returns because of the fiscal drag, when 1 million people in January had their calls unanswered by HMRC, and when a record number of people are now having their tax returns put in late because they can't get information, that this kind of policy should have been adopted by HMRC? And will he give us an assurance that this is not temporary, but that whatever help is required to aid taxpayers to pay their tax will be available to them?
Yes, on the latter point, I do want to give the honourable gentleman that assurance, as I gave some moments ago. And I think, again, as I've outlined several times today, I think we can all recognise that the move to digital for those who it's appropriate will then relieve the burden on those telephone calls and on some of the other service and precisely deliver the very end goal that he's looking for. And also, as I mentioned, it is an absolute goal of government policy to try and make sure the tax system is simple. And that example I gave of those who are on high incomes but have relatively simple tax affairs, just paying through PAYE, for example, we're trying to remove as many of those people as possible out of filling in a self-assessment return because they don't really need to. It's all done through PAYE. So I completely understand the points he's making.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst decisions on individual tax cases are rightly managed independently by HMRC, it was the political and public pressure which saw this ridiculous decision squashed. So what steps will ministers take to improve the accountability and the performance of HMRC?
Yes, there's a variety of channels and tools, including obviously my ministerial oversight and others, and the Select Committee and others play an important part, and other bodies. But also it is important, and I say I don't want to suggest in any way, shape or form that I'm removing myself from responsibility for HMRC here. I have ministerial oversight. Therefore, if colleagues do have concerns, they can always raise them with me, and it is my job to raise those concerns with HMRC as well.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer to my register of members' interest and chair of the PCS parliamentary group. Does the Minister not accept that one of the more disgraceful aspects of this episode is that neither the trade union or the staff appear to have been consulted prior to yesterday's announcement? And does he accept that is no way to conduct industrial relations or indeed deal with staff? And how does he manage yesterday's announcement with the comments of the Public Accounts Committee, which that the Department has to improve its ability to reach out to taxpayers, needs additional resources, so why are we now restricting customer access to the Department?
Well, I and HMRC have heard and respect the views of the PAC and other bodies in terms of recommendations and suggestions for improvements. And of course, many of these bodies do suggest the continuing move and the strategy towards digital online being an important part of that process. In terms of engagement, as I said, I don't have day-to-day operational responsibility for HMRC, but I do have oversight, and I have requested, for example, proactively several weeks ago to request a meeting with the unions, because that's what I tend to do in all my ministerial roles.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, this U-turn is very welcome, but does my honourable friend accept that one of the problems is the chronic lack of productivity within HMRC, and isn't that made worse because so many of them are working from home?
Again, I thank my honourable friend. He's correct that a focus on productivity is key, and I can assure him that those are exactly the kind of conversations I have. And of course, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury as well is leading a review across government on productivity. HMRC members are required to work in the office for, I think it's 40% of the time. And I can give him the assurance, because I've asked HMRC about this, to assess and monitor the productivity for those who are working from home versus in the office. And there is very little difference. But this, of course, because of the concern expressed by him and others, this is something I will keep an eye on.
Go on, Nigel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The leave is welcome, but if we're going to keep these helplines open, can we at least resource them properly and make them work? I spoke to one chartered accountant in my constituency this morning who tells me that recently he phoned HMRC with a complex query on behalf of a client. It took 40 minutes to get an answer. Yep. When the phone was answered, they acknowledged the problem. He suggested, in fact, that this answer might lie in his client's wife's data being incorrectly ordered, at which point he was told that they were only allowed to handle one case per call. He would have to hang up, phone back, wait another 40 minutes for an answer. Surely that's no way to treat a customer.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for raising that point. I'll happily raise that with HMRC.
Alison Toulis.
I'm regularly contacted by constituents, as I'm sure many of my colleagues are, by people who have had very poor services from HMRC, and people who are pretty certain they'd still be waiting had they not got their MP involved. My constituent, Mr McCall, retired to care for his terminally ill wife in 2021, but has since been chased repeatedly by HMRC to provide a tax return for 22-23. He doesn't use email and has described the diabolical experience he's had with the phone line, waiting 50 minutes for an automated voice, which then went dead. Does the Minister accept that this service level is not acceptable at all, that things must improve? And would he like to take the opportunity to apologise to my constituent, Mr McCall, for the distress that HMRC have caused him?
Minister.
Yes, I am sorry to hear about those circumstances for the Honourable Lady's constituent. And as I said, whilst I have to be careful about making sure there's arm's length on individual cases, she's raising also a broader policy point. And there's a lot of training and work goes on. I say I do want to repeat this. There's 60-something thousand people working for HMRC. Many of them are dedicated, hard-working, well-trained individuals who do a thankless job often. But she's raising valid point. I will happily raise it. And may I take the opportunity, Mr Speaker, I spoke incorrectly a few moments ago. HMRC are required to work in the office 60% of the time, not 40% of the time.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government was forced to extend the state pensions top-ups through till April of next year due to unacceptable delays on the DWP HMRC helpline for that issue. Given that the Minister has mentioned there is going to be a review, can he provide some clarity on whether it's going to include that helpline in its scope? Because I know it's a concern to many, many constituents.
I do have an ongoing engagement with HMRC. As I said, whilst they're operational independence, I do have some oversight and ministerial guidance is appropriate. And I have to say, and I do appreciate all comments from honourable members today, these will be live conversations. HMRC are listening as well to the conversations today, and I'll happily raise the point she raised.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And it's, first of all, can I thank the Minister very much for a positive response to the answers and to try and solve the problems, and we appreciate that. I've had constituents inquiries in my office regarding the struggle constituents have had getting through to HMRC on the phone lines. There's no doubt that people still rely on a service where they can get speaking to an individual. It's so important for us as MPs as well. With 1 million calls unanswered in January 24 alone, I think that illustrates very clearly the problem that the Minister is trying to address. Does the Minister not see that there must be an enhanced service for all the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to ensure that all calls are answered and dealt with? The better option of a personal phone call is right, but we need a drastic change. Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman. Again, it's really important that HMRC commands respect, and to a broad degree it does across the House and with our constituents, because that's the way then that we all comply with the tax requirements. And where there's a confusion, where there's an uncertainty, where there's a valid question, it's important that people are able to go and get that help, that advice and that support. For some people, it's appropriate online, but not for everybody. So as I said, the comments made today are very much appreciated, and I think and suspect the honourable gentleman will recognise the point I've made many times. It's also important that all of us do try and encourage and support the digitisation of these services, including the adoption of the app and so on to our constituents, because that will help make sure that the time available is focused on those who most need that help and support.
That completes the UQ. I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967,